Hello everyone and welcome to another video. In this video we are going to now add some user feedback for when certain events happen in our application. Right? So you can think of, we have login, we have register, we have log out now. So in the cases where we log in or register, whether we succeed or fail, simply just redirecting to a page isn't as useful. For logout, it's kind of okay. We can just change the login button to log out, and that's for the most part fine. What we're going to use, the Express Flash module, actually isn't going to work for logout because it requires sessions. And when we log out, we're destroying the session. So you'll need something a little different to do the logout. I'll let you guys decide how you want to convey this. I'm going to leave my app to where I know I'm logged out when uh, the log out button turns into login. So basically, the nav bar changes. Okay? So, anyways, what I want to do is have a way of notifying my users when their passwords are incorrect or they have successfully logged in or they have successfully made an account. All right, so we're just going to add some user feedback to our application. And what we're going to use is Express Flash. It's not a very fancy module, but it does make things a little easier. Okay, it's a relatively old module. It hasn't been updated in 7 years, but there actually isn't much code really to maintain here. You guys could write your own if you like. You don't have to install this module. All Express Flash really does is allows you to carry messages across a request. So what happens is there's this Flash middleware which is going to save messages on the session object. And then you can actually use this for rendering a template in a response, right? That way it is there. So that's what we're going to use. Um, we're going to use Flash to kind of show messages to the user when certain events have happened, right? We're going to use this request.flash function to give a key and then the message, right? So if we want to show some information, we'll do this message. I'm going to do an error and success message, depending if the login or registration fails or not. I will do either error or success. And then if you guys are using a different template one, this one shows Jade. Unfortunately, it doesn't show handlebars or EJS, but it shows Jade of how we can show the messages. But I'll show you guys how to include the messages into your handlebars templates. So the first thing we'll need to do is install Express Flash and then add the middleware. Okay, so this is what we'll do. We will stop our application. We will run npm express flash. Okay, and this will install the Express Flash module. And then we're going to need to import it. So we'll do var flash equals require, require, and then express. I'm going to say express flash. Okay. Then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to add the middleware to our app.js. Now we want to make sure we add this after the sessions because we need sessions to be set up and configured before we do all this. So you want to make sure you at least do it after this app.use. Okay. So put mine right here, app.use, not user, use, and we'll just call Flash. Okay. And this will allow Flash to manage the messages we want to send to and from the backend. Okay. So now what we can do is we go to all of our routes that we have so far, and we can start flashing messages for certain events. Now the only one I'm not really going to mess with is the logout, only because we can't really flash a message easily given that we have destroyed the session. So I'm only going to focus on login and log out. I mean, log in and register. Okay. You actually don't need this route. I don't know why I have this right now. You get rid of this. So in register, when we fail, we want to flash an error message, right? And since we programmed this relatively nice, I say relatively because there's some improvements we'll make a little later. I know that my registration fails in this area here. Okay. Now I'm not going to handle when a user error is not thrown. I'm going to let my app.js middleware take care of that, the error message here. So we're not going to get anything fancy with that. But in the event of a user error, and we had this res.redirect, I want to set a certain message. So basically, after I print it to the console so I can see it, what What I'm going to do is do request.flash, and then we'll mark this as an error, and then we'll say error.getMessage, right? Basically, we'll get the error message that was given for this object up here. And the nice thing is, since we have this user error object, it's actually going to work for all of these throw errors that we have, right? So that does the failure, right? Now what we need to do is find the success path, right? In this case, this one right here. So just before we do the redirect, we'll do request.flash. We'll say success. Oops, two C's, not one C, two S's, three S's. Then we'll say user account has been made. Any message is fine as long as you're conveying that the user account was actually created. Okay? So there's register, right? So we're just going to flash this message when a user is registered. Okay? Now we need to do the login. So login, I'm just going to cheat here and steal this request flash from the catch block, stick it in this catch block right here. And then this is where we have our success path, which is our user is validated. So just before I redirect, I'm going to do request flash, say success, and say you have been successfully logged in. And we will fix this typo here. Nice little spell checker. So now this will flash a message when a user's username and password has been validated. Okay? And probably should run no mods so we don't make sure we don't make any checks. Okay? So now when we run these routes, this information will be printed to the console, and we can see where these objects are on the session object by going to the session middleware that I added right here, which basically sets the log value for users. It actually moves sets the locals log value for our templates. So I'm going to do console.log, and we'll do request.session, right? And we'll just see what it looks like, okay? So we'll go to our app, and we'll hit login, and I have a counter made, so we'll hit submit, so see what it looks like. Go to our console, and you'll see in here somewhere, I guess I didn't put my request.session, unfortunately. Let me try to restart this and maybe change the word reflected in the restart. So let me restart our application, and then I'll refresh the page to see if it actually pops up. So refresh this real quick. Now, I'm not running my node through PowerShell anymore. I'm actually running to the WSL. So for some reason, the first request to the application is always slow, and all the other ones are fine. So let's go back to our terminal and see if our there it is. Okay, so there's our session over there. So I maybe just had to restart it. So you can see in here, there's actually now a flash parameter for the session object. We have the data for our cookie, our flash messages, whatever we have, the username, and the user ID. User ID we don't really need right now, but when it comes to posting a new, creating a new post, you'll see this will come in handy. Okay. So yeah. This is where our flash messages will be stored, and then these flash messages will be made available to our templates. Okay, so if we were to say we log back out and we'll log in, say test, just submit it now. You're not going to see anything here yet, but what you will see is a flash message. So now here we have an object that shows flash message. So now the trick is to get this to show up on our front end, right? So now what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to add some handlebars, templates, and some CSS to show our flash message. So this is going to be a partial. It's not going to be a full page. It's going to be a small little text box that I'm just going to show to the screen. So I'm going to make a new file called flashmessage.hbs. And in here, I'm actually just going to do the div tag for the flash messages. Now, my front end is actually a grid. I'm not going to put it in my grid. You can if you like, only because it's going to change the positioning of my elements. And I don't mean like it's going to ruin the grid, but it's going to shift things down to make space for the message. And then I have to modify my grid to have the message, then remove that row when I want to take the message away. So I'm not going to actually play with my grid. I'm actually going to have a div that is its position CSS properties can be set to fixed, so I can control its position with the top, left, and right properties. So it's not going to be in the natural flow of my document. But in any case, in here I'm going to have a div tag. Its ID is going to be flash message. Now we're going to have a little div tag for that. And then in here, I'm going to have another div tag. One for the error message and one for the success message. Right? So I'm going to actually do these on one line, and then I'll have another one which is div. Okay. So in here, I'm going to have a class. Now I'm going to steal the banners from the Bootstrap just because they look nice and I don't like designing my own. So it's going to be alert, and I'm going to use alert dash danger. Right. This is the danger one, the one that gets everybody's attention. And then I'm going to have class equals alert equals success. There it is. Success, right? So this would be a good one. Now, the question becomes, I only want one of these to be shown. I don't want to show both, right? I want to show danger when I have an error, and I want to show messages when I don't have errors, right? I don't want to show message. I want to show success when I don't have errors. So I want to make sure that I only show one. So I can actually use an if statement to do this, and these will be the handlebars if statement. So we'll have the handlebars symbols and the if block, right, which will be closed like this. And then between these, we will have an else, right? So basically, if we have an error, we'll do this, else we'll do this, okay? I like doing the errors first. That way, if something goes wrong with this conditional here, I always show something positive, I guess. Either way, either one is fine, whichever one I do first. It doesn't really matter, okay? So we have if, and then whatever condition we have here, and then if this condition is true, we'll show this one. This is if the condition is false, we'll show this one. Now the question is what do we put here? Okay, so inside when the template's being rendered, these flash messages will actually be on an object called messages, right? So we're gonna have to peek into the messages object in order to decide what message to display, at least what div text to display. So I will show this in a second, but for now, take my word for it for where it's at. So we'll do messages, and basically I'm gonna see if this object is present. So messages dot error. Okay. Now I know that the messages object is set up by the Flash module. This dot error actually comes from this value here. So Flash is going to move this to the messages object in res.locals, which is going to expose it to my templates. And then this will be a key in that object, and this will be the value. So if we have an error, we'll display an error. Now to access, really I'm actually accessing a value, seeing if it's actually there or not. If it's not there, this actually will be false. We'll see in a second that this actually doesn't work in all cases. We'll have to help out handlebars to determine if an object is empty or not. But this is really just seeing if a member is there. Okay, so if there is an error, we want to show the error message. So we'll do the handlebars syntax again, and then we'll do messages.error. Okay, and then we'll do the same thing for success, which is going to be hooked up to the success property. So we'll do messages.success. Okay, so that's how this partial is going to work. So if we have an error, we'll show this div tag. If we don't have an error, which means this is false, we will show this div tag, and it'll pop up on our screen looking pretty. So now we can add some CSS to this div tag. I don't have to add much because I'm going to rely on the Bootstrap to do this for me to make it look pretty. But I do need to add some stuff to actually put it in the right spot. So in my public folder, I have CSS. Most of this is not mine, it's Bootstrap and other things. Mine is main.css and form.css. This is all the styling for my forms. I keep it kind of separated because not every page needs the form styles. This is the CSS for the entire application, for all the stylings and layouts and stuff like that. So, like I said, I don't want to mess with my grid because this is the grid for my home page, right? And the only thing that really changes inside my application is my content pane, really. And this actually matches up pretty well with the pages, right? Basically each one of these partials will be rendered into this content pane here. So I don't want to mess with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some styling for the div tags, right? So what I'm going to do is first thing, keep it simple. If you notice that the message div tag is always a child of the div tag with this ID, so I'm going to do a little special selectors to select that div tag without having to give that a div tag an ID. So what I'm going to do now is we'll set the position and the size and the location of the message. So we'll do the pound symbol for the ID, right? And we'll do flash message. Right? Get some rules. Now I'm gonna set the position to fix because I don't want it inside. I don't want it to be in the flow of my grid. I'm gonna have it just lay on top of my grid, or actually on top of my entire page. So I'm gonna set the position to fix. You can use absolute as well. The idea is we don't want it messing with my grid. Okay? And then I'm gonna say left is 50%. Now, you're going to see in a second that this is going to make it look kind of weird because when you do left 50%, it does try to put the div tag in the middle. However, it puts the top left corner in the middle and not the middle of the div. Right? But we'll fix that. I'll leave it like this for now, and I'll fix it later. Then we'll do top 25%. So I'll keep it just below the top corner of the page. And this will make sure that the flash message is in the middle and near the top, even if I resize the screen. Okay. So this is all I need for that message. The Bootstrap takes care of the styling for me. And then to make sure the text is centered in the inner div tag, we'll do div last message, then do div, right? Basically, any div that's a child of another element with this ID, which should be unique, is going to apply this styling here. I'm going to do text align, and we'll do center. Okay. So just make sure the text inside the div here is in the center of the div. Okay? And then that CSS rule that I wrote, if you highlight it, at least in Visual Code, it'll show you how it's supposed to look, right? So this is saying that any div tag that is a child of an element with this ID will apply this rule set. You can also use this symbol here, which makes it a direct child. So it's a little more selective for the most part, but you don't have to if you want to. Just note that if I had multiple IDs, any div tags in this element with this ID would have this text centered. All right, so we're almost there to try this out and see if what I'm doing is actually going to work. So we had the partial, we had the CSS. Now what I need to do is I need to add some conditionals to the home page, or the home layout, to actually show the flash message, right? So I don't want this showing every time. I only want to show occasionally, right? So you see here, I have this if statement when someone is logged in, right? So when someone's logged in, this actually changes the element, at least adds an on-click event to the logout button. So we'll do something very similar for the flash message, right? So what's going to happen here is it really doesn't matter where I put it in this because it's going to be a fixed div tag, so I can put it where I want. I'll put just below the header because that's where it's kind of going to be anyways. And what we're going to do is we're going to say if messages, which means if we have messages, oops, if messages, wrong, the slash going the wrong way. If we have messages, we will render or include, whichever one you want to use, the flash message template. Okay, so what we have here. And if we don't have any messages, we don't include it. Okay, So that's how we can kind of ensure um, it including our message. Okay, so I think this is all we need so far to actually show the messages on the screen. Okay, so let me restart it just to be safe. We'll clear the console and restart it just to make sure it's there. Okay? And if we're lucky, you will see the message on the screen. And then actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a logger so we can actually see where that flash message is stored and why I'm using this messages object system. Okay? So we will log out so everything's clean. We'll log in. I have a user made. Let's submit. And I get a little you have been successfully logged in. Right? Now if you notice it's all the way to the right. Okay? So it doesn't look very pretty. Okay? If you also notice I always have this here. Okay? No matter what page I go to, it is always going to be there. Okay, but at least we can show the message, right? At least it shows the correct message. So now the question becomes, and we're going to solve two things: is one, how to get this in the middle so it's not off centered. So the left 50% is right is from this point here. So this is where the middle of the page is. We want those. We want the center of the div in the center, not just the left corner, the left side in the center. And also, we don't want the message always on the screen, right? So if you log out, we log in, let's say we do tests and we mess with the password, we submit it, and then we get invalid password, right? So this is kind of what we want to see, okay? We go back home and it's back to green. So we don't want to see this green box all the time. We only want to see when you have messages, okay? Now, if we go to our templates, not our templates, our code, you'll see here, this is the message object that I'm talking about. This is a part of the context object for all the templates being rendered. So if you go to an older one, here's the messages, right? Error, invalid login password. There's no message for that one. Session destroyed for logging out. So here's a successful, right? So this is why I'm using messages. Okay. So the Flash module is going to put it here when we want to when we add a Flash message. So it's going to basically copy it from the session object and move it to the messages object. Okay. So now the other issue, well, that's not an issue. It's just me telling you what it is. So I will fix both of these issues, but I'm going to fix the easier one, which is this guy right here. So to fix this, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our CSS, and we're going to apply a transformation to the Flash div tag. Okay, it's not going to be anything fancy. We're not going to do keyframes and animations stuff like that. But what I'm going to do is use the transform CSS property, which allows me to move objects in two-dimensional planes and given various functions I use. So transforms basically takes a few functions that we can do. We can rotate, we can scale, and it does things in 3D or 2D. All the ones that don't have the 3D marking on them are basically done in 2D. So the one I'm going to use is translate, which is going to allow me to transition an element in an X and Y plane. Okay. Now, what I'm going to want to do is I don't want to move it down, right? So it takes two parameters or one. If you give it one, I think it applies it both to the X and Y direction. So I don't want to move it up or down. So I'm going to leave it alone. So if I give it a positive value, it'll move, in this case, if it's the X, to the right. Okay. If I give it a negative value, it'll move to the left. So what I want to do is I actually want to move it back half the size. Okay. Basically, this is based off the element size. So at least I could do it based off the element size. If I do minus 50%, what this is actually going to do is it's going to move it back half the width of the element. Right? So if we go back to our page and I refresh this, you see it moved a little bit. If you want to see the center of the page, what I can do is I can show the grid, and the grid line right here that I have is basically the center of my page, right? That's the beauty of this grid with 4 equal portions. is this is the center of my grid. So if you notice here, my flash message is now in the center of my page. And if I take off this transform, you'll notice that um, the left side will be on the center, right? Or if I should, so this is basically where it is. So this is what we didn't want. So we'll put it back. Um, so now it's in the center, right? So when we log in, we'll see that cool little message, and it'll actually be in the center, right? And boom, perfect. Okay. Also, if you notice, these messages do not go away unless I navigate to the page. Okay, we'll fix that too as well. Okay, so now let's get rid of this issue. Okay, so an interesting thing to remember is handlebars is not JavaScript. Okay, so it doesn't really have a good way of knowing, and actually neither does JavaScript, what to do when this object is empty. Okay, so if you look at the console and I print out the template, the method object is empty, right? So this empty object is not going to be coerced into false. It's actually going to just be true, right? So we're always going to include it. So handlebars doesn't have a way of knowing if an object is empty. And to be honest, neither does JavaScript. You actually have to use a little two conditions in order to see if an object is empty. One, you see if the constructor is a type object, and two, you make sure the object has no keys. If it has no keys and the constructor type is object, then we know we have at least an empty object. Okay, so we need to give handlebars some help. Okay, so that should lead you to believe that I'm going to add a helper to handlebars. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to terminate my Express app for now. I'm going to go to my app.js, and if you notice, I left this empty here and I left a space here so we could add helpers. So now we're going to add a helper to handlebars to handle empty objects. And really they're just functions, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to do empty object and colon, and then its property, or sorry, its value, which is going to be just a function. So basically it's going to be a fat arrow function, right? And then this. Now, here is a parameter. This is the value going to be passed in from the template. So basically, I'm going to pass in the messages object to see if it's empty, right? So I'm just going to obj. Okay? So what we're going to do here, there's actually quite different variations of how to do helpers. Since we're only going to need to return a value, there's nothing special we need to do. Actually, this should be obj. But there is another parameter called options, which is going to be useful if you need to write helpers that need to generate templates or pass information to other templates. Okay, but we're not doing that. We're just returning a value, so it's actually relatively simple. So what we're going to do is we're going to return a Boolean expression determined if the object is empty. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is we'll see if the object dot constructor is equal to object. Okay, and if you remember from the videos, 2 equals is equality, 3 equals is equality, but also make sure that these two, the left hand side and the right hand side are the same type, so it's one of the equalities. So if the constructor is type object and object dot keys, we're going to grab the keys of the object, so obj. If the length is equal to 0. So basically, if our object has no keys, okay, then we know it's empty. So we'll bring this together, okay. So basically, if our object has type constructor, or sorry, its constructor is type object, and the object has no keys, we're going to return this, okay. So basically, if the object is empty, we're going to return true. Now, this is not going to work somewhat correctly in its current state because we want it to be true when it's not empty. So basically, we want it to be true when the expression here is false. So to do that, in most languages, you just negate it. So when the object is empty, we want it to return false, so it excludes this object. There are other ways of doing this too. You can use an each block, which is a little hackier because it can detect this as well. But I want to do this because I want to actually add a helper for you guys. So that's why I chose this route. So in any case, empty object is what this function is going to return whether or not our object is empty. So we can correctly determine if we should actually show this flash message. Now, what you cannot do, so the way you call these helpers is you just type empty object and then space and then pass in the parameters. Okay. Now you cannot do it this way. So if I were actually run node mod and do our application, this would actually would crash our application. Right. So if I refresh this, well, whenever it loads, and it should crash. You'll see here it says if requires exactly one argument. Okay. So if only takes one value, we can't pass any more. Okay. So what we need to do is, as always, use some parentheses. So what's going to happen here is now we will give the messages object to empty object. It'll do its work, return a value, which then will be replaced by the pair of parentheses. So it'll be if, and then whatever this spits back out. Okay. So let's restart this just to be safe. So now when we run this, I should not see the flash message on my screen unless I have it. We'll refresh. Whatever it loads, and we don't see it, right? So we'll log out, don't see it. It's not on screen, not on screen, not on screen, which is good. Okay. Good, 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 good. Let me fix this. Now I'll fix it later. The reason why this is so wonky is I have a height thing on my, so I don't want to fix it. I have a height setting on here, so it makes it kind of better. Remove it. It actually gets worse. Actually, don't remove that one. If you go on my grid, you go to the form container, move the height, and everything's okay. It actually works just fine. But anyways, let's log in. We'll see the message here. And this is where our message shows up. Okay. So now we can show the flash message. Okay. So the last thing I want to do is removing the flash message. Okay. And I don't always want it there. Maybe I want to remove it from the screen over time, right? Maybe I want it to have it fade out, and maybe I don't want to use jQuery's fade out or anything like that. I just want to do it myself, so I can just slowly take away from the opacity element, the opacity CSS property, to take away its visual component. So to do this, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to my front-end JavaScript code. Now, everything in here we'll talk about a little later, but I'm just going to skip it now. So this is linked to my homepage, right? And it actually, if you notice, it's linked with the defer keyword, which means this isn't going to be loaded until the entire page is loaded. So I can at least ensure all the elements of my page are loaded before my JavaScript is loaded. So I don't have to put it at the bottom. Okay? So if you do this, you need to assume that it is at the bottom. Okay? So what I'm going to add here is I'm going to add a timeout that is going to trigger an interval, which is slowly going to take away from the opacity of the element. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function that's going to set up the timeout and the interval. So we'll do function set flash message fade out. You don't have to program this yourself. There's some libraries that do it for you, but it's better to try it yourself and see if you can work it out. So I'm going to use set timeout, which is basically going to call a function, which is going to be the first parameter. It'll call this function after a certain number of milliseconds have expired. So I'm going to say after 4 seconds, I'm going to trigger this function. And in this function, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from full opacity. So I'm going to do current opacity equals 1.0. Now I'm going to do 1.0 because I'm going to subtract fractions from it. Opacity goes between 0 and 1, so it's going to be a decimal value. And then what I'm going to say is let timer equals set interval, which is basically very similar to set timeout, but set timeout runs once and it's done. Set interval is going to repeatedly run until you tell it not to. Okay? So again, this is going to trigger a function, right? And then we'll set the interval of how often this should be triggered. So I'm going to do 50 milliseconds. So every 50 milliseconds, this function is going to be triggered. Okay? So all I'm going to do is do current opacity is equal to current opacity minus 0.05. I'm going to take a little bit away from it, right? And this is going to run a bunch of times until it hits a certain condition. Okay? And then I'm going to say flash element, which I haven't got yet. I probably should pass it in, huh? Let's say um, element. We'll call this actually flash. I don't have to pass it in. I could make it be a global scoped variable. Actually, no, we'll do that. That's fine. Okay. So what I'm gonna put down here, we'll do let flash element equals document dot get element by ID. We'll say flash message, right? Now, technically speaking, right now I don't know if this exists, so I'm kind of playing the lottery because this could not exist and this function won't work. But I will protect that in a second. But I just want this to exist first before I finish this function. So we'll do flash element dot style, which is going to grab the CSS decorations of this element. We're going to do dot opacity equals current opacity. So we're going to set it to whatever the current opacity value is, okay? And this function is going to be triggered every 50 milliseconds. So now what we need to do is we need to stop this, okay? So we need to know when to remove this timer, okay? So thank you for closures, we have access to this variable inside this function down here. So I'm going to say if current opacity is less than 0.05, which means less than the last opacity to set, what I'm going to do, that's C style, not JavaScript style, is I'm going to clear the interval, which basically takes an interval object, right? And I'm going to give it timer, right? So basically this function here is going to stop the interval from being triggered again. And since we're done removing the element, or at least removing the opacity from the element, you do flash element dot remove, which can take it out of the DOM. You could do flash dot style dot display none, but I prefer just to remove from the DOM entirely. Because that's probably the better way, because it's not going to exist in the DOM anyways if there is no flash message. Okay? And then what we're going to do is nothing, because we don't have to do anything special. This is fine, right? So this is basically going to set up our own custom little fade out, right? And you can play with the speed of the fade out by modifying this value and this value. The larger this value, the closer it approaches, the quicker it approaches this value. The larger you do for this value, the quicker it goes to 0 without changing this value. So you can use this to kind of play with how quickly it fades out. Be careful how large this is, because the larger it is, the more kind of skippy it gets in terms of removing the opacity. Instead of being a smooth, it'll jump from being solid to almost translucent. So now we need to call this function. Right? So what I'm going to do is, if the flash element exists, right, since we already tried to grab it, if this flash element doesn't exist right here, this will return undefined, which if we put in an if statement, undefined is coerced or false. So if the flash element exists, we're going to just call this function set flash fader. Or you could just put all this here. Yeah. Why not use functions, right? So let's see if this works. I probably didn't have to do that, but why not, just to be safe? Especially since it caused me issues with it. All right, so let's refresh, which should take me to the same home page, but we'll have no flash message. Log out, log in again. We'll do the test message. We'll hit submit, and we'll log in. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and fades out. Okay, so now that flash message is gone, right? And we can try it again with the log in being bad. Let's submit. Don't change my password because I did the wrong one. 2, 3, 4, and gone, right? So at least we have some kind of things to help our user know when something goes wrong. Now, what you could do, what some websites do, is they'll have this flash message on the error case, right? It'll stay present until you type something in this form, okay? Now, to do that, you don't need to do all the fancy dancy set timeout set interval. What you do is, if the flash message is there, you hook up an on change event to the form, which detects when the input has changed. either on change. I think it's on change. It's either on change or on input. It might be on input, which is the first key click. On change would basically you being typing here and then changing text box. So what you do is on change of the form, you remove the div tag. So basically, you can have it just removed completely, or you can have it fade out like we have in our code. Right? Either one is fine. Right? But what we have now is a way to convey to our users something bad has happened, right? Or something good. Okay, and we can use this for the rest of our application. We can just do the flash message instead. Now remember, I didn't do it for log out because log out the session is gone, so I don't have a good way of flashing it. You're welcome to do it front side if you like. You can just render this div tag on your own and then hook everything up. I'm going to think it's okay just changing this to log out, to back to login. Sorry, back to login is fine. And this is okay because if you log out of my application, you're going to click this button here. So you're already looking right here anyway, so you'll see it change. Okay. So that is all for this video. I just want to cover Connect Flash. In the other video, we'll start talking about other things in the application like posting, searching, doing file uploads. Okay. So I'll see you guys in the next video.